you can see those cloud breaks developing across central areas, perhaps southern counties as well. Even if we don't get the cloud breaks, the cloud will be a bit higher compared to recent days. So a brighter day for England and Wales, with temperatures a little higher as a result. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, the cloud thickens and it turns increasingly wet and windy for central and northwest Scotland by the end of the afternoon. Gales picking up across the north of Scotland, in some exposed spots 50 to 60 mile/hour wind gusts, and to those winds bringing showers once the main area of rain clears south. And that rain trundles into Northern Ireland, Northern England and then eventually central parts by the end of the night, increasingly fragments into patchy light rain. But enough breeze overnight, enough cloud to keep things generally frost and fog free as we start off tomorrow morning. Nevertheless, another grey start for many, particularly in the south. Outbreaks of mostly light rain for a time, but I think by lunchtime that's all clearing through, and then brighter conditions follow, even some sunny spells for many. A brisk northwesterly wind bringing showers to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, and those showers falling as snow over the Scottish mountains. Temperatures around average in the north, but actually on the mild side further south, 11 or 12 Celsius. So Thursday's looking a bit brighter. Friday, I think more cloud returns for much of the UK, and that cloud on Saturday thick enough to give some outbreaks of rain and drizzle, mainly in the west.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:32 on GB News. This is the briefing on your television and on your radio. Today on the programme, we'll be discussing whether Sue Gray's report will drop today, or it could be tomorrow. We'll be talking about Prime Minister's questions coming up at midday today. We'll be talking about Bradford, and we'll be talking about Ukraine. So much coming up after your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to get you up to date in the GB News newsroom. The Prime Minister is bracing for more questions about Partygate allegations as Downing Street waits for the Sue Gray report. The senior civil servant is yet to submit her findings about possible breaches at Downing Street during lockdown, but it could come as early as today. The US President Joe Biden says he'd consider personal sanctions against President Putin if Russia invades Ukraine. Russia has amassed around 100,000 troops near the border and has sent more fighter jets to Belarus for drills. Well, European diplomats are gathering with representatives from Kiev and Moscow in Paris later today to try to ease tensions. A man charged with the murder of his teenage daughter in Norfolk is due to appear in court. 19-year-old Laura Malt died of chest and abdominal injuries after being hit by a car in West Winch on Sunday. Her father, Nigel Malt, will appear at King's Lynn Magistrates Court later today. From Friday, people in Wales who test positive for COVID will be able to finish self-isolating after 5 full days instead of 7. They'll still need to produce 2 negative lateral flow tests taken on days 5 and 6. Vaccine passports are also being scrapped in Northern Ireland for pubs and restaurants today, with nightclubs allowed to open for the first time since December the 26th. More than half of nurses in Scotland are considering quitting the profession. A survey carried out by the Royal College of Nursing Scotland found 61% of its members are thinking about leaving because they feel undervalued and overworked. You are up to date here on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. I'll be back with you in about half an hour's time. Right now, though, the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and on your radio. Well, let's kick off today with undoubtedly the biggest story in UK politics at the moment. Boris Johnson has said he's willing to be interviewed by the police over those Downing Street party allegations, but he does not think he's broken the law. The highly anticipated Sue Gray report into alleged lockdown breaching parties at Number 10 is yet to reach the Prime Minister, but it has reportedly now been completed. It could well land on the Prime Minister's desk today. He's promised to respond to it in Parliament when it does, meaning we could well see it either this evening or tomorrow. The Prime Minister will prepare to face more questions at Prime Minister's Questions later on today as well. Well, let's discuss this febrile atmosphere now with GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey, who joins us from outside Number 10. Darren, first of all, what can we expect to take place today?
Well, as you say, the Prime Minister is definitely going to go to PMQs at midday. Beyond that, it's all a bit up in the air, it must be said. You're right, Tom. Sue Gray has now concluded her reports. We suspect it will be with Downing Street, probably within hours. But then it's ultimately up to the Prime Minister to decide when it is published and indeed in what form. And there is a bit of controversy this morning about what form that might take, whether it will be a summary, whether it will be in its full form, whether it will potentially be redacted, that is, that bits of it will be blacked out to protect people's names and potentially even events. There will, of course, be enormous political pressure for it to be issued in full. Speculation this morning that Sue Gray does want it to be published in full. And
in your view, Darren, do you think it serves?
MPs.
Do you think it serves the Prime Minister better or worse for a more open and full publication? Because, as you rightly say, there'd be enormous political pressure, perhaps enormous pressure from his own side, were that report to be received by him in full, but not published in full.
Yeah, indeed. And ministers this morning didn't quite seem to know what the answer to that question was, whether it will be issued in full. You're right, there'll be a terrible political stink. There will be accusations of cover-up. I expect in the end, Downing Street will probably have to bow to that. Though the argument, of course, would be from Number 10 and others that some of these issues may well be HR issues, that they involve junior members of staff, and it wouldn't be right to put their names in the public domain. But in the end, I think the political pressure may well be too great. Tom, you're right also pointing out, though, the Prime Minister has said he will come to the Commons to answer questions from MPs in all of this. And I think what will happen will be, it'll all move quite quickly, as in that report will be published and the Prime Minister will very quickly go to the Commons to answer those questions. I think in the end what Downing Street don't want is kind of hours or days of people being able to go through the report over and over again and to formulate their questions. Now, whether that happens today or whether it happens tomorrow, well, frankly, that is anyone's guess.
What a rollercoaster it has been. Yesterday morning we were thinking this could be delayed for weeks or even months, and now it's today or perhaps tomorrow. A fascinating story. Darren, thank you for bringing us those latest updates from Downing Street there. Well, there's something that I think underlines the whole issue regarding all of these stories, and here's my take on events. We want our politicians to be miserable. That is, I think, a fundamental truth that has to be acknowledged if we're to understand the emotion at the core of the Partygate row. No one cares if ministers and advisers were in rooms together in Number 10. We care if they were having fun. No one cares about officials having discussions about vaccine logistics or how to avoid mass unemployment. We care if there was warm wine or M&S cake there at the same time. No one cares if the Prime Minister thanks his staff for their work, least of all that he thanks them outdoors, unless there are nibbles there too. At the core of this whole saga is a puritanical story. Politicians and their advisers may gather as long as they did so in a fundamentally miserable way. To some extent, it's cathartic to demand morose politicians. After all, they're the people who design the regulations that govern our lives, not just in a pandemic, but beyond that realm too. The restrictions on how businesses can operate, from staffing ratios to opening hours to health and safety. Perhaps it's time to stop calling these everyday peacetime rules set by government regulations and start calling them restrictions too. Politicians, after all, ordinarily do little else than invent new ways to restrict our liberty and our income. More regulations and higher taxes. It's a rare moment that the one-way train to a bigger tax burden and more restrictive state chugs back a stop or two. And even on those vanishingly rare occasions we see it rolling back, it does not take long for the brakes to screech on, the reverse gear to dislodge, and the huffing great locomotives of state power to plough ever further forward into our lives. No wonder we want our MPs to be paid far less than they are. No wonder we flinch when we see one has claimed for business class train tickets or has the temerity to take a holiday. No wonder we convulse at the idea of Number 10 Downing Street being spruced up, or that the government of the United Kingdom might have its own aeroplane that's not also shared by the royal family and the RAF. No, to us Brits, politicians in their own lives must be sullen, sad and sober. The idea that a politician, let alone a Prime Minister, might have anything close to a moment of downtime is fundamentally anathema to us. So let's set aside the epidemiology, as so many have done for so much of this pandemic. Let's set aside even the dark, often fatal crime of hypocrisy. Ultimately, perhaps, what has alighted the nation quite so much is the agonising, terrible, squirm-inducing notion that politicians might be having fun. Well, on to another issue now. The US President Joe Biden says he would consider personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin if Russia invades Ukraine. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has said the UK is willing to put boots on the ground to support any effort by NATO if Russia invades Ukraine. Well, joining me now is Sam Armstrong, the Director of Communications at the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome to the programme, Sam. Can we expect any more developments from Russia this week?
Well, Russia really only has one thing it can do further, which is to invade, or as Liz Truss might coin it, launch an incursion into Ukraine. We might see some sabotage attempts launched at Ukraine, conducted locally, but really the ball is now in Ukraine's court, and we're seeing just how powerless some of what the West's position has left us, where we're waiting for them to act.
It's interesting. There are a number of people who talk about this build-up of troops, who talk about the strategy that Vladimir Putin is pursuing, saying that he may not actually want to invade Ukraine at all, that this might all just be a grand bluff, a bargaining chip, trying to extract concessions from the West without a drop of blood being spilt. How weighty would you put those allegations?
Well, look, Putin's actions show that the troops on the ground, at least, believe that they are preparing for war. This has been an enormously expensive exercise from Russia, and if it is a bluff, it is a well-executed bluff, and we can't act as if it is. Otherwise, we're only going to leave the door wide open. But look, you're right to drill down into the risk to Putin of blood. That will be what ultimately puts Vladimir Putin off. The idea that Ukraine might end up being like Afghanistan was for the Soviet Union, ruinously expensive, and seeing a long line of Russian bodies coming back home to deeply saddened Russian mothers. Now, the weapons that the UK have sent, these are anti-armour weapons, anti-tank weapons, are exactly the kind of weapons that Ukraine will need to inflict those kind of losses. They are only useful against Russian tanks, but they are deadly to them.
It's interesting listening to the words of the Foreign Secretary, to the sort of narrative that's being put forward by the United Kingdom, talking about how this would not be a short, sharp war. This would be a long, protracted struggle that the people of Ukraine are willing to fight and the West is willing to fund. Does Russia believe them?
Russia doesn't believe them yet, that's clear. They're still preparing for an invasion, but there's a few more things we can do to drill home the point. The first is we've provided weapons for the Ukrainians to fight back against Russian tanks. We also have Stinger anti-aircraft missiles that could be used to against Russian fighter jets and indeed against their helicopters. Those would scare Russia very much. We could provide up-to-date satellite information from our spy satellites. And we could train their special forces to make this very, very, very painful indeed for the Russian army. Those are the sorts of things that are going to put Putin off. Ultimately, sanctions against him, or indeed the Russian people, matter little. Putin has proven many, many times he does not care about the wealth, health, or satisfaction of the Russian people. It is only about playing the grand games of state that he feels he was born to do.
In fact, interestingly, if we look back to 2014, the last time Russia took a bite out of Ukraine, and the sanctions that followed, actually, Vladimir Putin's approval rating went up within Russia. The sort of Russia versus the world attitude, the fact that people were talking about Russia as if it were somehow a great power, seemed to do well for Putin. So potentially sanctions could be counterproductive.
Yeah, look, there are sanctions that hit the Russian people that don't seem to work. What you've got to remember, of course, is Russia is a land in which its people have all been far poorer in the past than they are now. So they're not going to hit, in historical terms, that much. There are sanctions that can work. Putin is propped up by a gang of conniving kleptocrats that have ripped off the Russian people in order to buy themselves super yachts, homes in Chelsea, and a globe-trotting lifestyle. Now, Putin is beholden to these people. So in a sense, sanctions that finally stopped London being a playground for these sorts of folks might be effective. In many ways, the King's Road in Chelsea is as much of a front line for this conflict as is Donetsk.
Well, fascinating, and no doubt there'll be more developments on this front in the days and weeks. We'll keep our ears close to the ground on it. But for now, Sam Armstrong of the Henry Jackson Society, thank you for joining us on The Briefing this morning. Now, 1 in every 8 children in England were off school last Thursday due to COVID-related absences, according to official figures. It comes as scientists warn of a spike in cases that could lead to another surge in cases amongst adults. Well, earlier on breakfast, Eamon and Isabel spoke to the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson, about what this means for the classroom.
I've known for a very long time what was needed in order to drive down transmission of COVID in schools. It was 18 months ago that SAGE told us that ventilation and getting that right would be really important, and the government just haven't done that. You know, we had an announcement that there will be 9,000 purification units for classrooms, but we've got hundreds of thousands of classrooms across our country, and most of those devices won't be arriving until the end of February. So when I've been out visiting schools, and I've seen it for myself, head teachers have just been asked to prop open windows and doors in order to keep air circulating. But obviously it's pretty cold at the moment. We're in winter, and I think it is completely incompetent and complacent of the government to imagine that it's, the answer is just to put children in their coats, expect them to keep on learning, and then open up windows. We need to see a lot more action from the government on ventilation if we're to really drive down the transmission of COVID in our classrooms. Well, this is the third year of disruption to their education, and that does of course mean that where children have to be at home because they have COVID, parents have got to stay home and look after them, and that's a real pressure on families, and this has been going on of course for a long time. What we haven't seen running alongside all of that, of course, is a proper plan from the government to make sure that our children are really at the heart of our recovery from the pandemic. You know, time and again, they've just been an afterthought. They've never been a priority. You know, on the first day that schools were closed to most children, that was the day the government should have been planning for what came next. Instead, we had that report from the government's catch-up chief, Sir Kevin Collins, which the government effectively put in the bin and haven't delivered on. And it's our children and young people who are being let down and are not being given all the support they need to have a really, brilliant future and achieve all they can. But the Prime Minister needs to take some responsibility. You know, he's lied and lied and lied again. And to add to that, we've got this sorry spectacle of senior ministers, paraded out every day, coming up with an ever more ridiculous litany of excuses to justify the fact that when, schools were closed to most children, when they were at home, when our key workers were, working in intensive care, in supermarkets, keeping our country going, the Prime Minister, number 10, were organising boozy parties with a suitcase full of booze being wheeled in, and they're just taking the British people for fools if they think that we can't see that. We don't need Sue Gray to tell us what is absolutely plain and right in front of us. But I think, the fact that the government is so mired in scandal, spending all of their time consumed by seeking to defend the Prime Minister, means that they aren't taking the action that we need to see around the cost of living. We all know the gas and electricity bills have absolutely skyrocketed, that the prices in the shops, particularly for the basics, are much, much higher than they were, and that's placing real pressure on families. And that's why Labour's got a really clear plan as to how we deal with that. The government have had months to do something and haven't. What we're saying is that we should provide immediate support on heating bills right now by cutting VAT on gas and electricity bills, paying for that with a windfall tax on oil and gas producers in the North Sea. That's the kind of action we need to see from the government on tackling the cost of living. That's the kind of action we are not going to get for as long as they are focused on just getting through day to day, providing excuses for the Prime Minister. And I think the Chancellor in particular has to ask himself, how long is he prepared to put up with this, allow standards in our kind of institutions, in the office of Prime Minister, be so debased when he himself has every intention of trying to become Prime Minister once Boris Johnson is out of the way, and it really only is a matter of time. So, Boris Johnson should just do the decent thing, get on with it and resign.
Labour's Bridget Phillipson there, of course, Shadow Education Secretary. Well, moving on, the tragic death of the toddler Star Hobson at the hands of her mother's girlfriend shocked the nation last month. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation of the case is the news that 5 referrals were made to social care in the weeks preceding her death. The service repeatedly closed the case, stating that no intervention was necessary, and now Bradford Council, which handled the Star Hobson case, has been stripped of children's and social care services. The services will be placed under an independent trust following recommendations from the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zwahi. Well, joining us now to talk about this in the studio is Robbie Moore, the Conservative MP for Keighley and Ilkley. Welcome to the programme. This is welcome news, but it did come too late.
Yeah, I'm very pleased that the government have stepped in and stripped Bradford Council of its children's services. Bradford Council have been deemed unfit to run children's services, and we will now have a new trust structure set up, which will be definitely a step in the right direction to be able to provide that reassurance to the many vulnerable children, not only in Keighley but right across the Bradford district, that we will now be starting to put measures in place to protect them.
And in Bradford specifically, there seem to have been a number of problems dating back not just months but years. Why has it taken to this point that children's services are finally being released?
Well, children's services were rated inadequate and in need of severe improvement way back in 2018. And in July of last year, there was a very lightweight 50-page review that looked at child sexual exploitation across the Bradford district, but concluded that there had been multi-agency failings, of which Bradford Council's children's services had been a failing part of providing protection for young children across Keighley and the Bradford district. And then, of course, as you said in the report, we had the Star Hobson case where, 5 separate occasions, referrals and concerns had been made by family members and friends of Star Hobson, and yet Bradford Council's Children's Services did nothing and closed the case. So I'm very pleased that the government have now stepped in and will be setting up this trust structure going forward.
What's behind this sort of failure? Is this just people being lazy? Is there something institutionally a problem in Bradford Council? What's Why is this council in particular having so many issues?
Well, I have deep concerns and I have no confidence at all in its current leadership. I think the Chief Executive and the leader of Bradford Council need to resign. The Chief Executive has been in a position of control since 2015, propped up by the leader of the council since 2016, and the leader of the council should be holding the Chief Executive to account. But yet these failures have happened consecutively since Ofsted did their review in 2018. So I think that there is a lack of proper leadership, lack of strategy, issues with culture within Bradford councils together, and also a lack of cohesion and dysfunctionality between the Children's Services Department and the core management team at an executive level within Bradford Council Services.
Now, you've been saying this for quite some time. Is it not fair to say that the government has been a lot slower than some campaigners on the ground in terms of recognising this issue?
Well, I mean, I've obviously been advocating that real changes need to be happen since becoming the MP for Keighley, which has now just been 2 years. But you know, the government quite rightly have stepped in and will be setting this trust structure up. You know, I welcome the fact that Bradford Council are working and willing to work with the government. They've obviously recognised their failings. And it is right that we will now be getting proper improvement measures put in place going forward, because it's the right thing to do for protecting young children across the Bradford district.
Now, I can't have you on the programme this week without asking about, of course, the big political story of not just this week, but last week and, in fact, the year. Have you submitted a letter into Sir Graham Brady?
I have not submitted a letter, and I think it's absolutely right that we wait for the Sue Gray report to come out.
And when do you expect that to be? We're hearing that it could be this afternoon, it could be tomorrow morning. Is that when you think the bulk of your colleagues will make their decisions?
Well, I think a lot of colleagues are waiting for the Sue Gray report to come out. You know, and it looks as if that may come out today, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, Robbie Moore, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. I can see we're not going to get much more out of you yet. We'll have to have you back once that report has been published. But for now, thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing. And thank you for joining us too, for watching on your TV and listening on your radio. That's it for The Briefing this morning. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Mercy. But before that, let's take a look at the weather forecast.
Hello, good morning. Many of us are waking up to, once again, cloudy skies, but I think there's more chance of some brighter spells developing today before unsettled weather arrives in the north later. Still under the influence of high pressure, but it's slipping away. As a result, tighter isobars, a bit more of a breeze, helping to break that cloud up before these weather fronts bring wet and increasingly windy weather to parts of Scotland, especially by the end of the afternoon. Ahead of those weather fronts, a few cloud breaks overnight, so some frost and fog to start things, but they'll clear, and then you can see those cloud breaks developing across central areas, perhaps southern counties as well. Even if we don't get the cloud breaks, the cloud will be a bit higher compared to recent days. So a brighter day for England and Wales, with temperatures a little higher as a result.